Welcome, everyone, to Bracket U, a college basketball bracket podcast brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. We're currently in our 11th year of doing bracketology work and our second episode of Bracket U this season. I'm your host, Brian Tonsoni. Joining me is our Director of Media Credentials and Superior Bracketologist, Steve Painter. And before we get to Steve and talk about our brackets, we want to give a special thanks to our Delphi administration for all of their support for all the activities we're able to do, to Bob Thompson for our intro music, to Jared Morris of the Back Home Network for all of his guidance in getting me started in the podcast realm. And so we're ready to talk a little brackets, and we have meetings every Tuesday and Thursday with our students. And today we spent a lot of time on the bubble. And we also spent a little bit of time on the last number one seed. First of all, Steve, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. And your initial thoughts on that one seed line, particularly the battle between Tennessee and Iowa State for the last number one.
Yeah, when you look at all the metrics, they are so close in about almost everything. The one thing that probably stood out for me that we have Tennessee as the last one seed. Is just their quality of wins. And road wins are so important. They've won at Illinois, at Louisville, at Texas, all quad ones. And you compare that, Iowa State's got their biggest win that they beat Kansas at home. But they got some nice wins against Marquette, Baylor at home. So it is really tight. You could have an argument for either one, but I personally like Tennessee myself.
And it is tight. You can throw our two seeds in there too, that if they go on a run, Florida is 17-2. We have Kentucky, Marquette, and even some of our number threes can make a run to get up there because the SEC is going to be just a brutal grind. And a team that can win two or three can jump up there. But I'm with you on Tennessee, the 6 quad one wins. But the quality of those wins, I think, matter, as you said, winning on the road in some of those places. And Iowa State's a real close, top 2 seed. And then the question always comes, are they really going to put 3 teams from one conference on the one seed line? Well, we saw that with the ACC one year where they had Virginia and North Carolina and Duke all on the one seed line. If they're the most deserving, they're going to get on that one seed line. So right now, 3 SEC teams on the one seed line. Steve, any of those teams in the 2-3 range, and even you got teams like Illinois and Purdue sitting down there that are quite a ways back, but is there a team outside of the quad one that you think it might be a favorite to sneak on up there?
As far as like who we've got as the second seeds that could sneak up into the first?
Yeah, second or third seeds, anyone that you think has a really good chance of moving up.
Yeah, I was going to say Florida. They're at a 5 net. They were so hot and they absolutely destroyed Tennessee. But then I believe they just lost recently. So everything is. I don't have recency bias, but Florida is definitely a team to keep an eye on. And then Kentucky's having a really good season too. I'm looking at them. They've got 6 quad one wins. Which is actually more than Duke and Alabama that we have on the one seed. So those are 2 more, ironically, both from the SEC. So SEC is so strong.
Yeah. I think you're going to see an SEC team most likely move up there. I think a Big Ten champion, if they go on a 4 or 5 game run, Michigan State hasn't lost in forever.
Yeah.
They're 4-2 in quad one, 4-0 in quad two, no bad losses, 3-0 on the road. And they're moving up. They have some real tough games that they beat a really nice Illinois team at Michigan State at home. So that those teams, they're going to have to win quite a few to beat out some of these SEC teams for that number one seed. So that was obviously our major discussion, a piece of our major discussion today. And it's always the most interesting, too, because everyone focuses in on those top 4 seed lines. But what we really wanted to do today in our meeting with our students is really take a look at individual teams that are on the bubble. And for us right now, and it's temporary, but for us right now, there are 6 teams in that we think are in jeopardy of falling out with a loss. Those are North Carolina, Pittsburgh, Maryland, Vanderbilt, Ohio State, and Arizona State. with those last four being playing at Dayton in the play-in game. And then we have about 10 teams that are on the bubble that have suspect resumes that are really going to need to put a 2 or 3 game winning streak to get in our bracket. So we're going to go through a few teams here and just share with you why we have these teams where they're at, what's good about them, maybe what's bad about them, and we'll try to hit as many teams as we can here this evening for these bubble teams. And Steve, I'll take, or if you want to, go ahead, North Carolina. Why would they be in, and then why do you think they could drop out?
Well, North Carolina, I mean, some of their strengths, they've got a great strength of schedule, 9 overall, 4 non-conference strength of schedule. They got 3 road wins, a good net, a decent net that would normally get you in at a 39. One of their, I'd say their biggest drawback right now is just the lack of quad 1 wins. They've had plenty of opportunity, but they're 1-7 in quad 1. So you could go either way with them.
And North Carolina doesn't have as many opportunities as teams in the SEC or Big Ten have in getting more quad 1 wins. So their back is to the wall to make the tournament, which is shocking when we talk about a blue blood like North Carolina. And then the next team is Pittsburgh, which is for a lot of us maybe a surprise team this year. They are 12-6. They have 1 quad 1 win, and it's against Ohio State. And they've also beaten West Virginia, who is in the field. So they have 2 wins against teams that are in the field, even though Ohio State is in the back end. They are right on the bubble on all of the predictive metrics and the result-based metrics that are on the team sheet. They, too, their best quality to keep them in with such low quality wins is they scheduled pretty tough in the non-conference. And I think that is a huge deciding factor for the committee when it comes down to the last group of teams. So those are our last 2 buys that get in, which wouldn't have to play. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just totally agree with you. And when we're looking at Carolina versus Pittsburgh, I mean they're neck and neck. I'd say the one advantage Pittsburgh has right now is no bad losses, whereas Carolina does have a quad 3 loss. But I
think that was just recently to Stanford at home in North Carolina. So now we have the teams that would be at Dayton. And again, I think you could probably make an argument to put any of these teams out of any bracket and would be realistic. But let's start with Maryland. Stephen, you did a deep dive on Maryland today in our class. So share with everyone why you think Maryland probably should be out of our bracket.
Yeah, even though I'm kind of a Maryland fan, their resume, it just isn't great and typical of what you'd see of a team making the tournament. Probably one of their biggest glaring weaknesses is their non-conference strength of schedule. It's a 329, which is really bad. They're 0-4 on the road, and then they only have 1 quad 1 win. They're 1-4 in quad 1. They beat Ohio State at home. The thing that helps Maryland is their net, but when we were looking into why is their net so good? Their strength of schedule is so bad that they just absolutely blew out really bad teams, Canisius and Alcorn State. So they're able to kind of pad their stats, which helps their net. But I think it's kind of a mirage because I don't think they're really that good of a team. Now they could prove me wrong.
Yeah.
They're playing at Illinois. There's a great opportunity, but right now I would have them out myself.
Yeah, so you were asking for them to be out now, and they got to play at Illinois and at Indiana, and they're not good on the road. They're 0-4 on the road. The Illinois game's a lot tougher than the Indiana game, but this is how close the bubble is right now, and it's not a good bubble. It's kind of a bubble with really questionable resumes, which I think, Steve, makes it harder. You're not talking about 6 really good teams and have a lot to argue for a team. It's really going to come down to which criteria, 7 or 8 of the voters, whatever number of votes in the committee room it takes to pass a team into the bracket, what's going to be important, because all of these resumes have quite different pieces to them that are beneficial. Well, I'll take Vanderbilt. The best thing they have going for them is a win at home against Tennessee, and Tennessee is our last number 1 seed. That is going to carry huge weight. They have no losses in quad 3 or 4, but they have a bad non-conference strength of schedule. Net of 38 is okay. They're all the metrics, the mathematical metrics are within the right around 45 or below, which puts them in the field. So we have them in. They've been in and out, but the only reason they've really been considered in is because that big win. And I think at 15-4 in the SEC, they're going to have a lot of opportunities. But a team like Vanderbilt can't lose 3 or 4 in a row. They got to keep winning in order to get in. But right now, Maryland and Vanderbilt would be matched up in either Tuesday night or Wednesday night in Dayton. Another Big Ten team, Steve, we saw them on Tuesday night, both just really shocked that Ohio State was able to beat Purdue in Mackey Arena, one of the toughest places to play. They're, 11-8. So why would Ohio State be in and why might they be out?
Well, I mean, prior to that Purdue game, we had them solidly out. But when you win on the road at Mackey Arena, one of the toughest places to play in the country, I mean, it is just a massive win. I think that's really going to be a shining star on their resume. And it was kind of interesting after the game. We covered the game. I was in the tunnel, and then Coach Jake Diebler walked in, and he was right by me, and you could just see the look in his face. He looked at one of his assistants and just gave him a big hug. It's like he knew. It's like this was huge. So I don't think he was expecting them to win. And so right now, that's their biggest strength. But then you look at other things that they got 3 quad 1 wins. They've got a really good strength of schedule. So yeah, they do have the 8 losses overall, but they're a good team. And like Matt Painter had said earlier, they were just like 3 plays away from being 5-2 coming into that game. So they're a sneaky team. They are good. Their record just doesn't necessarily show it yet.
And overall record isn't really one of the major criterias, but that's when you're 3-6 and 1-2 in the 2 quadrants, so you're 4-8 compared to everybody else who's closer to 500 in those quadrants. That keeps you a little bit lower, but they have had a lot of close games, and they have a great non-conference schedule, and their overall strength of schedule is fantastic. And again, I think when it comes down to real close decisions here at the back end, so Ohio State is our second to last team out as of this morning, and we then will go to Arizona State, who is 56 in the net, 2-6 in quad 1 and 3-0 in quad 2 with a quad 3 loss, only 1-4 on the road. But the reason they sneak in for me is the non-conference strength of schedule. They scheduled very, very well. They have a chance in the Big 12 to get some wins. But boy, we've had them in, we've had them out. This team needs a good month or so to make sure that they stay in. Again, their mathematical offense and defensive numbers, predictive metrics are not great, but they have a win over West Virginia on the road. They have a win neutral against St. Mary's. They have beaten a neutral New Mexico, who all 3 of those teams are in the tournament. And so, they have competed well and gotten some wins against teams in the tournament. So those are our teams that'll be in Dayton. Good teams, they could break out, but those are the 4, along with North Carolina and Pittsburgh, that are the most vulnerable to be in and out of a bracket if you check our work at Delphi Bracketology. We'll remind everyone you're listening to the Bracket U, brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. I'm Brian Tonsoni. Steve Painter is joining me tonight as we run through here about a half an hour's worth of bubble talk is our main focus tonight. We just got done talking about the 6 bubble teams that are in. Let's start going down the list a little bit about the first 4 teams that are out. Steve, Central Florida, UCF, I had them in, then they lost 2 games to really good opponents, and now they're the first team out. Man, they are really close. Your thoughts on Central Florida?
Yeah, that was one of the teams I was looking at today. I was really kind of, I guess you could call it scrubbing, really doing a side-by-side look at Maryland versus UCF. And I liked UCF on just they win about every category. The one thing, though, that is really hurting them is their net. They got a 77 net, and that's typically the range of teams that don't get in. But a lot of good things about them. Overall strength of schedule is 16. They got 3 quad 1 wins. They're 500 on the road. And I'm a big fan of mid majors too. So when it came down to one of the big mega conference teams versus a mid major, I think that has some impact on the committee. I think
you're calling UCF a mid major.
They have one or two.
They're in the Big 12.
Well, that's true. That's I forgot.
And
they're Big 12.
I forgot
Florida. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget that too. I forget about Oklahoma not being in the Big 12 and being in the SEC. But Steve, here's the point that I want to share with our listeners. The difference between Maryland, who beat up on the lower end of their schedule by 60, 70 points, UCF struggled. So they beat a 301 Tulsa by 13. They beat 294 Tarleton State by 15. They beat Tennessee Tech 286 in the net by only 11. They beat California Baptist 180 by 15. So their that's why the net is so skewed a little bit there, is because they lost games. And then when you lose 99-48 to Kansas, again, that hurts your metrics too. So I believe, Steve, that the committee is aware of these outliers. The Maryland outlier at 24, which really isn't as good, and the UCF. And you'll see that, we look at trends, and we said a team in the 70s never gets in. But I think, there could be a team that has a 70 that has displayed some winning characteristics that can be explained. Like they just got off to a real slow start in November, but they won the games. They just didn't win them by a margin that would help their net. UCF is one of those teams. You talked to me today about putting them in. I may, after the show, just move them in. Let's talk Texas Longhorns. They are 13-6. They are 33 in the net, 2-5 in quad 1 and 2-1 in quad 2, 4-6, slightly under 500. Not necessarily great strength of schedule. The Longhorns are another team that I think we have had in and out. They bounce in and out based on their wins. Just defeated Missouri, which was a nice win for the Longhorns. I would not be surprised to see Texas in and continuing to move up if they can get some big wins in the Big 12. Their best win is that Missouri win. They've also beaten Oklahoma, who is in the tournament too. So you'll hear us talk a lot about, do you beat teams in the tournament? We have a couple of live viewers. If you do have a question and you feel comfortable enough, put it in the chat. We'll try to answer it at some point here, but before we get out. So those are the first two teams out, UCF and Texas. The next team, Steve, is Cincinnati. What do you know about Cincinnati?
They're a good team, but they got a couple things that worry me. Their non-conference strength of schedule is 278. And when we're looking at our last two teams in, Ohio State, Vanderbilt, have great strength of schedules. And all these teams that are just setting out for us have not so good strength of schedules. So that's hurting them. And then also Cincinnati doesn't have a single quad 1 win yet. They're 0-5. So everything else is decent. They got a decent net, 41, but I think they're going to need more quality. They're going to need some wins to get in.
Yeah, I think most of the time, if we go back and look at some of the trends, these last teams in are at least 300 or better in the non-conference strength of schedule. I think that really sits with the committee. Now, the committee changes every year, so we don't know if that's still a priority. I kind of like that. You got to schedule tough in the non-conference, and I think they reward teams that have a couple losses to good teams versus teams that run the table and win by 50. And that's why we have Maryland down and we have UCF up, and maybe need to flip-flop them like you suggested today. Xavier took a tough loss. They were leading most of the way against St. John's last night, and I believe lost in overtime. They are our fourth team out. They are 12-8, 1-7. And so you're starting to see some really upside-down records, which, again, the losses don't necessarily matter as much until you just accumulate too many. But 1-7 in quad 1, and that's balanced out by 4-1 in quad 2. So 5-8 puts them on our consideration list. Good strength of schedule. They play in the Big East, have been playing better as of late. Now let's just do a couple more. I think Wake Forest is a interesting team as well that has moved up our consideration board. What do you know about they still called the Demon Deacons down there? I believe so.
I believe so. Yeah, I mean, you look at some of their positives. They've got a good strength of schedule. Non-conference was 52. They're 500 on the road. They got 3 good road wins. But the thing that's hurting them right now is very similar to UCF is their net. They're down. They're in the 70s also. They're at a 75. So they're kind of a similar team to UCF, and so right now we got them out, but they've got enough on the other metrics, enough that it's going to get them into consideration. They just have to have some more.
I'm going to share something with you, and you need to remind us as we get closer to making our decisions. An outlier like that, but if they finish 3rd or 4th in the ACC, which is down this year, that's not an official metric where you finish in the conference, but we saw Notre Dame get selected, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and they didn't have the quad wins, so they were real low in one of the pieces of criteria. But because they were 4th in the ACC, I think that they got voted in as one of the last 4 teams in. I think that was when Indiana played at Dayton as well. So keep that in mind too, that these outliers like UCF and Wake Forest, if they finish towards the top or make a run in the tournament, their conference tournament, even with some metrics like you mentioned, the net, that could be a deciding factor. So we'll have to, when we finish our bubble here in 2 months, I think we need to keep that. The problem, Steve, between those 2 teams, UCF and Wake Forest, UCF has many more opportunities. They're going to play, they lost a close one to Houston recently. You got Arizona, who's in the top 20 in the net. You got some teams that you can beat. West Virginia's in there, Oklahoma, that can really pad your resume and help. But Wake Forest isn't going to have too many because of the ACC work. Okay, so let's just review here. We have Maryland, Vanderbilt, Ohio State, Arizona State in, but, razor thin, and a couple of those teams could be out. And then our first 4 out, UCF, Texas, Cincinnati, Xavier. And then we have Wake Forest just on the outside. Nebraska has fallen down to our 6th team out. Nebraska, Northwestern, and Iowa. 3 Big Ten teams are right there in our next 4 out. And then 9th out is Dayton, who has 2 really nice wins, but has fallen on hard times. And then you got a couple more Big Ten teams in Indiana and USC that are about 11 or 12 out. And that's our discussion on the bubble. It's going to be a tricky bubble, I think, this year. So, Steve, a couple other things. We really didn't get a lot of time today in class to talk about these, but there's some within the 6, 7, 8, 9 range. There's some outliers too. Georgia has no bad losses, but they've lost 4 in a row. How far does that drop them? We have Baylor, who has traditionally been good. And when you discuss Baylor and talk about Baylor, you think of a top 4 seed. And the same with Gonzaga, who we have in the 8, 9 seed range. That's just so abnormal for me to see them down there. But how do we judge those resumes when we start seeing 7s and 8s in the quad 1s, and those teams have 2 quad 1s and not anything else to bolster their resume? But your thoughts on any of those teams that are in the middle of our bracket?
Yeah, those 3, they are just they're so similar. All 3 of them are 2 and 5 in quad 1, and predictive metrics are similar. The best one would be slightly Gonzaga, but it's tight. And like you said, Georgia has been slumping. And another thing I don't like about the resume is a 248 on the non-conference strength of schedule. But yeah, and then I'd say out of those 3, I like Gonzaga the best. I know the committee doesn't really look at head-to-head, but it's hard to ignore when Gonzaga played Baylor, they just absolutely crushed them. So
yeah,
if you were splitting hairs and saying which one, Gonzaga or Baylor, I mean, I'd go with the team that beat them, team that won.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that I found too is if you're upside down on your quad 1, we just mentioned those 3 teams are 2 and 5, 2 and 5, 2 and 5. If you have a lot of quad 2 wins, sometimes that can balance out. So let's say you have a high net, you've won on the road, you've had a good schedule, but maybe you're 4 and 8 in quad 1, but you're 7 and 1 in quad 2. That's why sometimes we add those together, and you want to be above 500 or accumulate a lot of those quad 1 and quad 2 wins. But that's one way. If you see a team that doesn't have the highest number and they're ranked higher than a team, for example, we have Georgia at 29 at 2-5 in quad one, and West Virginia at 30 on our spreadsheet is 4-4 in quad one. And for most sports fans, that's a bracket no-no, because 4 wins is better than 2. Why don't you raise them up? But this is a bunch of data put together, and I think why those teams are in the 8 and 9 seed range is because they have low quad one and they have low quad two. You start looking at Michigan is 2-1, only has 2 quad one wins, and they're 21 on our seed list, but they have 5 quad two wins. So that's what I mean by balancing out. St. John's 1-3 in quad one is our top 7 seed, but they have 4 quad two wins. So when you add that together, you kind of look at those numbers added together a little bit. And so Georgia, Gonzaga, and Baylor only have 2 quad ones, and they only have 2 quad twos, and they're safely in the tournament. But I think they still have work to do to move up the seed line and wear a white jersey on Selection Sunday or the first weekend. So that's kind of what we go through on a day-to-day basis with our students. We kind of just summarized that up this evening. Steve, any other things that you have seen in college basketball or on our seed list or in our discussion that you want to share before we go to our last call question?
Not really. And just one more little tidbit about the 3 teams we were looking at: Baylor, Georgia, Gonzaga. They all have 2 quad one wins. So you like to say, well, who'd they beat? And Baylor definitely has of those quad ones, they're the weakest. They beat St. John's on a neutral court, and they beat Arizona State, which is kind of right on the bubble. Whereas you got Gonzaga, who's just crushed Baylor, and they got a good win at San Diego State. So just another little thing that I think separates those 3.
And again, seeing those in the 7, 8, 9 discussion when we talk or when we move in the bracket, it just doesn't feel right. But each team is new, and each season is new, and the body of work is the body of work. Whether you are a brand name or you are an up-and-coming Georgia team, it is what you've done this year. And that's why we do what we do. And I think it's fun to look at these things on a constant basis. And I can always tell when Steve's at a game at Purdue or wherever he's game, because I can see his little avatar pop up on our spreadsheet. And I imagine you're the same when you see our students pop up at various times. That we're looking at this quite a bit throughout the week, each week of the basketball season. Mm-hmm. So I have trouble. You talked about UCF being a mid-major, but they've joined the Big 12. No. The college sports world is a mess with these mega conferences. Mm-hmm. 16, 18 teams. And I think the reason you're seeing a lot of these conferences be real strong is because then when they go out and play non-conference teams and they win, then they play each other. Now you're looking at potentially 12 from the SEC out of their 16 teams. I think that's a little absurd. I think if 12 teams deserve it, I get it. Question is, would you want to see a maximum number for these super conferences? And maybe the maximum number is based on 18 in the Big Ten. You get 11 possibly. You can get less than that, but you can't go over that. I know that's not what we've done forever, is put any limits on anything or any restrictions on anything, but I'm not a big fan of all these super conferences. And so I guess I'm kind of leaning towards, I'd want to see some mid-majors. And right now I'm not seeing a whole lot of mid-majors on the list for at-larges. But do you think there should be a limit in some of these super conferences on how many teams get in?
I don't know. I would say not an official limit. I mean, what if you just, for instance, said, all right, we're going to cap it at 7 teams, and then you've got some just outstanding teams that are 8, and they're just they don't make it because of their conference. I don't know if you put official cap on it, but I would say this: when you get down to the bubble, then I would tend to we've got 12 teams from the SEC, and Texas is on the bubble. So you're looking at, if we put Texas in, that would be 13 out of 16 teams in a conference going. And I would think in that case you would lean more towards someone else. So I'd say maybe an unofficial cap, but I don't know if they should make it an official number, because it can change. Each conferences have great years and down years, and this just happens to be a great year for the SEC.
Hey, we got our number 1 Iowa fan checking in. John Altina I hope I pronounced that right. It's been a year since we were on the podcast. He was on one of our podcasts. We might need to send you the link. I know you've been doing some bracketology for your Iowa Hawkeyes, and they defeated my Hoosiers. So I don't know, how we do that, but we would love to have you on maybe some Thursday and talk some bracketology too. So. I would hate an official thing just for the same thing if there's deserving teams and you get off over the cutoff. But I have been a proponent, and I just don't think it'll fly, that you guarantee 4 spots for mid-majors, and then you have this process, right, where we just discuss and pick the 4 best, and then or make sure they're slotted in as a 7 seed, 8 seed, 9 seed, 11 seed, not necessarily putting them in Dayton as a play-in game. Mm-hmm. And, last week we talked about expansion. I think some of these things are going to be on the table, and I hate to do it to something I love and I think is just fantastic, but change is inevitable, and I just want the change to be beneficial. I'm not so excited to see the 10th or 11th Big Ten team in there as opposed to a second A-10 team. I think Dayton struggled, but VCU is there, and St. Bonaventure. I'd like to see a couple of those teams. I think that makes for the good, exciting first weekend. But we'll see. We're obviously not the decision makers. If it was, it would be a perfect tournament, I think, as proud as we are as Delphi Bracketology. So, hey, big game for us tomorrow. We're going to be at Mackey again. Can't get enough of being in Mackey. Your Boilers got to bounce back against a very good Michigan team. They don't want to take another loss and put in jeopardy that 3 or 4 seed line. Your thoughts about your Boilermakers before we get out of here?
Yeah, I think it is a really important game because you just look at what's the difference versus a win versus loss. They lose this one, and then now it's like we've got red flags all over to lose. If they lost back-to-back home games and to an Ohio State, it'd be a really bad sign. Whereas if they just turn around and they beat Michigan, it'll just be like, oh, they just had one bad night. And because we did prior to Ohio State, Purdue had won 6 conference games in a row. So just tomorrow is going to be kind of a turning point. It's going to be back into the swing of winning, or all of a sudden, no, we are slumping because we've just lost two big games at home. So I think it's a big turning point. I'm looking forward to the game.
So Steve, as I've said many times, is our credential person, and so I'm going to that game. I'm going to Marquette at Butler, so I can see Shaka Smart, who I love, and I got quite a few games coming up. I'm going to see UCLA for the first time ever in a couple times. I think at Illinois, at Purdue, and at Indiana. I got those 3 games scheduled. We're doing a lot of things. Had 2 students at the game Tuesday night, one on the floor as a photographer. If you are a Purdue fan and want to check out our student photography work, they are posting pictures there. We have a media department now that's starting to make the intro video that we played is student created. And so it is just exciting. I know, Steve, you feel that way too when we give these opportunities to students.
Yeah. It's a really cool part of what we do. It's just a really unique opportunity that high school kids get that I just don't see them getting. I've never seen anywhere else. So it is pretty special.
All right, so that's going to do it for our show this evening. Check us out, DelphiBracketology.com. We'll have a new bracket up on Friday. We did not get one out on Tuesday. We had a couple weather delays here in central Indiana because of the cold. And so we didn't get to meet with our kids, but we'll put one out tomorrow. Also join us. We have an Instagram account that's just now starting to move, but more than likely get a hold of us at Twitter at Delphi Brackets. We'll try to answer any and all of your questions. We have a donation page if you're interested in helping us with the internet costs, pizza parties, all of those things. And we appreciate all of our supporters in that area. So for Steve Painter, I'm Brian Tonsoni. Happy Hoot watching. We'll be back next week again at 6:30.